My parents bought my 17-year-old sister a brand new 25K car for Christmas. Well, I got a $10 phone case, and their justification left me speechless. Christmas has always been a big deal in our family. Lots of presents, family time, and those little traditions that make the holiday special. But last year changed everything for me. In my family, it's just the four of us: my parents, my younger sister, and me. For context, I've been wanting a car for a while now. Ever since I got my green peas, an Australian license you can get at 18. My parents had even floated the idea. I'd pay half, they'd pay half, and together we'd get a car within a 10K budget. Fair enough, right? I've been working since I was 14, saving almost every dollar from my two jobs, so I was ready. My sister, on the other hand, just turned 17 and got her red peas. She's never worked a day in her life, hasn't saved a cent, and how do I put this? Hasn't exactly been making the most responsible choices lately. But my parents didn't seem to mind. They've always been chill about her decisions, even when they probably shouldn't be. Still, I figured this Christmas would be my moment. I'd been dreaming about what car they might help me get. Practical, secondhand, nothing fancy, but mine. So Christmas morning rolls around. I wake up to the sound of my sister crying. Happy tears by the sound of it. Naturally, I assume she's just excited about some big gift she's gotten. I head downstairs and there's a single present with my name on it under the tree. I think, okay, I'll open that in a minute, but first, where is everyone? I follow the sound of my sister's cries to the driveway, and that's when I see it. A brand new shiny blue Hyundai i30. It's got one of those massive ribbons on the front like you see in commercials. My parents are standing next to my sister, who's sobbing with joy, hugging them like her life depends on it. For a split second, I think, could this car be for me? But then I ask. The answer hits me like a truck. It's hers, my dad says with a proud smile. Hers. Her car. The girl who hasn't worked for a single dollar. The girl who didn't even need a car yet. The girl whose idea of responsibility is, well, non-existent. I didn't handle it well. I stormed back inside, slammed my bedroom door, and stayed there all day. I couldn't bring myself to sit around the Christmas tree or join my family for lunch. I was too angry, too humiliated, too forgotten. When my family got home from visiting relatives, my parents knocked on my door to talk. They asked why I'd skipped Christmas. So I told them straight. Why did you buy her a car before me? I'm older. I've been saving for years. I work hard. I've got a plan for my future. What's her plan? They had no answer, not a word. They just stood there, awkward and silent, before walking away. Later, I remembered the present with my name on it under the tree. I went downstairs, unwrapped it, and found a phone case. An eBay phone case for a phone I already had. Not a car. Not even something thoughtful. Just a reminder of how little effort they put into me that Christmas. Am I the asshole for feeling this way? Maybe I could have handled my emotions better, but I can't shake the feeling that I've been overlooked. And for what? A moment of joy for someone who didn't even put in the effort. Update 1. The days following Christmas were rough, to say the least. My sister was absolutely over the moon with her new car. She spent most of the day snapping pictures, posting on social media, and driving around the neighborhood with my parents like she'd just won the lottery. Meanwhile, I stayed in my room, alternating between trying to distract myself and feeling like I was invisible in my own family. My parents acted like nothing had happened. No apology, no explanation, just awkward silences whenever we crossed paths. The cherry on top? My sister didn't even realize I was upset. She asked if I wanted to go for a drive with her, like that wasn't the last thing I wanted to do. I couldn't let it go. I needed answers, so on the third day, I sat my parents down. I told them, calmly this time, how I felt. I laid it all out. How they'd promised me a car for over a year. How I'd saved half the money for it like they'd asked. how I was the one working 2 jobs and making plans for the future. I told them how humiliated I felt opening a phone case while my sister got a brand new car she hadn't lifted a finger for. I was hoping for some kind of explanation, anything to make sense of it all. Instead, they doubled down. My dad told me I was overreacting and that my sister needed the car more than I did because she was just starting to drive and had more learning to do. My mom chimed in, saying it was about safety, that a brand new car with modern features would be better for a new driver. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked, "So, what about me? I'm older, I've been driving longer, and I'm the one who's been saving for this. Why don't I deserve that kind of consideration?" They just shrugged, like they didn't have a good answer and didn't care to find one. I wasn't letting it go that easily. "You've been telling me for months that we'd split the cost of a car. I've been relying on Mom for rides to work for years now. How does this make sense?" That's when my dad dropped the bombshell. "We didn't think you needed it as much because you're so responsible. You'll figure it out." I couldn't believe it. They were basically punishing me for being reliable and rewarding my sister for doing absolutely nothing. I pointed this out, and my dad just sighed like I was being difficult. "Life's not always fair," he said. "You'll understand when you're older." That phrase sent me over the edge. I told them I wasn't asking for life to be fair. I was asking for them to keep their word. If they'd told me months ago that the car was off the table, I wouldn't have spent all that time saving for nothing. I wouldn't have gotten my hopes up. My mom tried to soften the blow by saying they'd help me out in the future when I was ready to buy my own car, but by then it was too little too late. I ended the conversation by saying, "Thanks for nothing," and walked away. Probably not the most mature way to handle it, but I was done. Over the next week, things didn't get any better. My sister started making snide comments about how I was jealous of her car. She even joked that maybe if I worked a little harder, I'd be able to afford one of my own. That one stung. I knew she didn't mean it maliciously. She's just clueless. But it felt like she was rubbing salt in the wound. I snapped back that at least I knew the value of hard work. Unlike her. That led to a huge argument, with her storming off and calling me bitter. My parents, of course, took her side. My dad said I needed to stop being so negative and learn to be happy for my sister. My mom added that it wasn't becoming to hold a grudge, like I was the one in the wrong for being upset. I told them I'd be happy for her when they started being fair to me, but that just led to more silence and awkward avoidance. At this point, I decided to stop trying to reason with them. If they didn't care enough to see my side, then I wasn't going to waste my energy fighting them. I started making plans to buy my own car without their help. It wasn't what I wanted, but I couldn't keep relying on my mom for rides or waiting for my parents to follow through on a promise they clearly didn't intend to keep. I calculated how much more I'd need to save to buy something decent outright, and it wasn't pretty. I'd need to work more shifts, pick up extra hours, and tighten my budget even further. Meanwhile, my sister's car became the centerpiece of every family conversation. My relatives couldn't stop gushing about how generous my parents were, how lucky she was, how beautiful the car was. I had to bite my tongue every time, especially when my parents acted like they'd gone above and beyond for both of us. At one point, my aunt asked if I'd gotten a car too, and my mom laughed nervously and said, "Not yet, but we'll figure something out." I had to leave the room before I said something I'd regret. The breaking point came a few weeks later. I'd just gotten home from a long shift at work, and my sister asked if I could help her parallel park. She was struggling to learn and thought I'd be a good teacher. I stared at her, speechless. She had the nerve to ask me for help with a car that should have been mine. Or at least one I'd earned. I told her to figure it out herself and went to my room. That night, I decided I was done letting this situation control my emotions. I was going to take matters into my own hands. I started looking for secondhand cars online, comparing prices and figuring out how much I could realistically afford. It was depressing seeing how far my budget would stretch compared to the shiny new Hyundai sitting in our driveway, but it was also freeing. If my parents weren't going to support me, I'd prove I didn't need them. A week later, I found a used car in decent condition that I could afford with the money I'd saved. It wasn't flashy, but it was reliable, and it would get me where I needed to go. I showed my parents the listing, half hoping they'd feel guilty enough to chip in, but they barely glanced at it. My dad said, "Looks fine to me. If you're happy with it, go for it." My mom didn't say anything at all. I guess that was the moment I realized I couldn't count on them for much anymore. I bought the car a few days later and felt a mix of pride and bitterness. On one hand, I'd done it on my own, which was satisfying in its own way. On the other hand, I couldn't help but think about how different it could have been if my parents had just kept their promise. My sister, of course, had to make it about her. She joked that now we could race, as if our situations were remotely comparable. I ignored her. Since then, I've started distancing myself from my family. I still live at home for now, but I spend as little time with them as possible. I focus on work, school, and building a future where I don't have to rely on anyone but myself. It's not easy, but it's better than feeling like an afterthought in my own family. Looking back, I don't think I'll ever fully understand why my parents made the choices they did. Maybe they thought they were doing the right thing. Maybe they were just playing favorites. Or maybe they didn't think at all. Whatever the reason, it's changed the way I see them. And not in a good way. Update 2. It's been a few months since I bought my car, and things with my family haven't gotten much better. I thought that after I got my own car, I'd feel a sense of closure or relief, but instead, it's just created a bigger rift between us. The tension is still there, and honestly, it's worse than before. I guess I didn't realize how much I was still holding on to the hope that things would go back to normal, but I was wrong. The first real blow came when I had to go to my family for help with something. It was minor, something I could have probably handled on my own, but I thought I'd try. My car had a minor issue with the engine that needed fixing, and I had no clue how to go about it. My sister, of course, couldn't help at all. She still barely knew the difference between a tire and a muffler. But I thought, hey, it's a family thing, right? I figured maybe my parents could give me advice, or at the very least, point me in the direction of a mechanic they trusted. I was completely wrong. When I asked my dad for help, he barely looked up from his phone. "I'm not a mechanic," he said. "You should have checked it out before you bought it." Then he shrugged, as if that was all the advice I needed. My mom wasn't any better. She said, "You've been driving for a while now. You should know what to do by now. You'll figure it out." It stung more than I thought it would. All that talk about how I was responsible and mature when I was saving for the car? None of that was there when I actually needed help. It felt like they were completely disconnected from my reality. Like I wasn't their daughter at all. More like some distant acquaintance who was expected to have it all figured out. That's when it hit me. They were only interested in celebrating my achievements when it was convenient for them. They didn't really care about me as a person with real struggles. They didn't want to help me. They wanted to pat themselves on the back for giving me a car at all. And that was it. When I needed them for something as simple as advice on a car problem, they couldn't be bothered. My mom even suggested I call the mechanic myself, even though I had no idea who to contact or where to go. I felt like I was on my own, just like I was before I bought the car. To make things worse, my sister had the nerve to rub it in even further. She started saying things like, "I don't know why you're so upset. You've got a car now, so what's the problem?" I didn't even know how to respond. Every time I talked about how I felt about the whole situation, she just dismissed me, like my feelings were irrelevant. She was just happy to have her brand new car, and the fact that it came at my expense never seemed to cross her mind. But I guess I shouldn't expect much from her. She was still wrapped up in her own world, oblivious to the things that really mattered to me. A few weeks ago, my parents asked if I wanted to go on a family road trip. They were going to take my sister's car, and I could take my own if I wanted. I thought it might be a chance for some bonding, some way to bridge the gap between us. But I couldn't bring myself to go. How could I? After everything that had happened, I didn't feel like part of the family anymore. I felt like a stranger who had to figure everything out on her own. I said I'd rather stay home and work. That's when my dad made another comment that really stung. "You know, you really should learn to spend time with the family more. It's not healthy to shut us out." That one hit hard. It was like he completely ignored everything that had happened and was trying to guilt trip me into being normal again, as if it was my fault the way things had gone down. I tried to explain that I couldn't just move on like they had. I couldn't just pretend that everything was fine when they hadn't acknowledged how hurt I was. But they didn't want to hear it. My mom just gave me a long, disappointed look and said, "You're being stubborn." It was at that moment I realized I wasn't the one being stubborn. I wasn't the one refusing to move forward. It was them. They were the ones who couldn't admit they'd made a mistake. They were the ones who couldn't see that I needed more than just material things from them. I needed emotional support, validation, and respect. But all they had to offer was empty gestures and surface-level care. They didn't care about how their actions affected me. And that's when I realized I could never rely on them the way I thought I could. The hardest part? It's the emotional distance that's growing between us. I used to talk to my parents about everything. We had our disagreements, sure, but we always understood each other at the core. Now, I can't even bring myself to tell them about my day without feeling like I'm wasting my breath. They don't get me, they don't support me, and I'm starting to accept that. My mom will make small talk, but it feels so fake now. Every time I try to bring up something important, something that matters to me, it feels like I'm talking to a wall. They just don't understand, and they don't care to. The guilt is also real. I feel bad for pulling away from my family, for distancing myself from my sister and my parents. I know I'm the one who's supposed to make peace, to let things go. But I can't. Every time I try to force myself to move on, it just feels like I'm denying my own feelings. The truth is, they don't deserve me to sweep everything under the rug for the sake of family harmony. They don't deserve me to pretend that everything is fine. I'm done pretending. I've been focusing on myself more than ever. Work has been a good distraction, and I've started taking up new hobbies that help me feel like I'm moving forward. But it's still tough. Sometimes I'll hear my sister laughing in the other room or see my mom and dad planning something together, and I feel left out, like an outsider in my own home. They've been pretending that nothing ever happened, and maybe they truly believe it's all water under the bridge. But for me, it's not that simple. I'm trying to accept that I can't change them. I can't make them see things from my perspective, and I can't force them to care. All I can do is keep moving forward, even if that means doing it without their support. As I continue to navigate the emotional fallout from this experience, one question keeps lingering in my mind. How do you rebuild trust with people who only seem to care about the surface level things, without ever truly seeing you for who you are?